in the last blistering stretch of a dying summer, when the desert looked as brittle as old parchment, and the sky hung low with the smell of coming storms, old Caleb Hartley rode his horse slow across the fence line of the Hartley Ranch, a ranch so wide a man could ride from dawn to noon and still not brush its farthest shadow. His breath rattled in his chest like broken glass, each inhale a reminder that time had come for him the way it comes for all cowboys born under hard suns. And Caleb, a man who'd survived gunfights, droughts, and a rattlesnake bite that should have killed him decades back, accepted it the way a cowboy accepts winter quietly, without complaint, but seeing the danger coming all the same. What troubled him wasn't death. It was what would happen to the Hartley land once he was gone. Men from the railroad had circled him like vultures for years, waving contracts fat as a gambler's lies, offering just enough money to make a desperate man foolish. Caleb wasn't desperate. He was dying but not desperate. This place wasn't meant for that. The red earth, the whispering cottonwoods, the mesas that rose like the bones of giants, this land had belonged to the Apache people long before a Hartley ever set foot on it. And Caleb, who had lived among them as a younger man, who had been saved once by an Apache elder after a horse fall nearly snapped his neck, carried that memory like a brand on his heart. So before the sun fell that evening, Caleb rode south, away from the eyes of soldiers and settlers. His horse's hooves clicked softly against stone as he reached a narrow pass, guarded by thorn bushes. He dismounted slowly, joints aching, breath thin, and lifted both hands in peace as two shadows emerged, silent, sure-footed, holding bows strung with the ease of men who did not miss. They recognized him. Word was carried like wind among the Apache, and Caleb was greeted not as a stranger but as someone walking the last mile of his trail. They brought him to their camp, where Chief Nanton, gray-haired but sharp-eyed as a hawk, waited beside the fire. Caleb told his story short, honest, stripped of anything but truth. "I want the land to go back to your people," he said, voice trembling not from fear but from the weight of the decision. "I'm selling it for $1. $1, Nanton. That way, the government can't contest the sale, and the railroad boys can't sink their teeth into it." The chief stared at him for a long time, the firelight dancing in his eyes. This was not the kind of gift a man made lightly. Land was sacred. Land was life, and giving it away, especially to the people who had once lived on it freely, was an act that carried more than generosity. It carried justice. "Why?" Nanton finally asked. Caleb swallowed. "Because it was yours before it was mine. Because your people treated me like a brother when you didn't have to. Because dying men owe the truth. And the truth is that this land belongs to your children's children, not to railroads, not to greed." Silence fell, deep as a canyon. Then Nanton nodded once, solemn and slow. The next morning, they signed the deed. Caleb pressed his shaky hand to the paper. Nanton laid a single silver dollar in Caleb's palm. The setting sun painted the sky in fire. He felt the weight of that dollar in his pocket, not as payment, but as a promise sealed. He didn't know if he'd live long enough to see what happened next, but he hoped. And in the quiet that came with nightfall, Caleb Hartley whispered to the wind, "Take care of them. Take care of this land." He died 3 days later in his sleep. The ranch lay silent, empty, waiting, and at the first light of the next sunrise, when shadows were long and the world held its breath, 70 Apache warriors stepped onto the Hartley Ranch in absolute silence, moving like ghosts returning home. The sun had barely brushed the peaks of the eastern mesas when the warriors arrived, 70 strong, faces painted in the colors of dawn, horses moving with a grace earned by generations raised in the rhythm of wind and earth. This was not a conquest. It was a homecoming. The Hartley Ranch stretched before them like an open book, its grasses rippling under the morning breeze, its barns empty, its fences weathered but standing, waiting for hands that understood the land rather than sought to devour it. Leading them rode Chief Nanton, the signed deed tucked safely inside a leather pouch at his chest. Behind him were men and women who remembered stories of this place from their elders, stories of hunting trails that once crossed the ridges, of sacred springs hidden in the low valleys, of starlight ceremonies held long before the boot prints of settlers had scarred the soil. As they passed the ranch house, they halted. The air smelled of dust and old wood. A hawk circled above, crying once a sharp, lonely sound that echoed across the open fields. Nanton dismounted, pressed his hand to the weathered porch rail, and closed his eyes. "He gave this to us," he murmured to his son, "not as charity, as restoration." They explored the ranch with reverence, not looting, not claiming, but remembering. One of the young boys found Caleb's old hat hanging on a nail in the barn. Another discovered a poem scratched into the wall, written by Caleb in a shaky hand. "The land is not mine, per. It never was. It only let me live, per. Until its true heirs returned." No one spoke for several minutes. Some of the warriors bowed their heads. Others placed a hand over their chest. This wasn't the act of a dying man seeking forgiveness. It was the act of a man seeking truth. But their silent gratitude lasted only until the dust rose in the distance, thin at first, then thickening like a coming storm. Riders, many, soldiers, railroad men. It didn't matter. Everyone mounted quickly, faces tightening. The peace of the dawn was shifting. What arrived was a group of 12 suited men on horses, railroad representatives, furious and red-faced, waving legal papers like weapons. They shouted accusations, demanded the deed, claimed Caleb had been mentally unfit when he sold the ranch. But Nanton simply stared at them with the calm of stone. When they tried to approach the house, 70 warriors closed ranks in absolute silence, not threatening, just unmoving. The railroad men realized the implications. A single wrong move would bring down a storm they could not hope to survive. After a tense standoff, the Apaches lawyers, they had come prepared, stepped forward, produced the notarized witness deed, and read it aloud with the strength of a judge. Caleb Hartley had legally transferred ownership for $1. The law was on their side. The land was on their side. The truth was on their side. When the last of their dust settled, the warriors relaxed, shoulders easing, breath returning. And then, in a soft voice that carried across the gathered families, they restored the ranch not to what it had been under Hartley, but to what it had been before any fences existed. Springs were reopened. Ceremonial grounds were cleared. Children ran where once cattle had grazed. Women sang while tying sage bundles. Men hunted along the ridge lines their great-great-grandfathers had known. And when night came, they lit fires that burned high, not in defiance, but in honor, fires they knew Caleb would have understood. For though the old cowboy was gone, his spirit lived in every sunrise over those fields, in every hoofprint on the sand, in every breath of free wind over restored land. A living testimony to a cowboy who died with nothing but gave everything. The story spread across the territory like wildfire. Travelers came to hear the tale. Some left in tears, some left in awe, all left changed. And every dawn, as the first golden light spilled across the sanctuary, the Apache warriors would gather in silence, not as conquerors, but as caretakers, grateful for the land returned, for the ancestor who had guided them back, and for the dying cowboy who had seen them as brothers, not enemies. The land slept in peace again, and as long as the Apaches stood on it, it always would. If you want more stories like this, powerful, emotional, and cinematic, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next tale.